Live for God Studio Productions.
This is Living Power with Dan Hurst.
The second thing is in verse 13, Matthew 5:13, be salty. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. And I always thought that this meant that, boy, you better do your job, otherwise you're going to be discarded. But there's more to it than that. Now, this is such an amazing truth from Jesus. I really want you to get this. We all know that salt is used for flavor and to deter putrefaction. So, of course, what Jesus was teaching was that we're to be flavor in the world and that we're to deter moral and spiritual putrefaction. But I want you to see something here, something that Jesus said, something about the way this is all worded. Salt in and of itself it cannot lose its saltiness. This is what's so interesting about this passage. You can find salt today that's been on the shelf for years and years and years, and it's still salty. Salt in and of itself doesn't lose its saltiness. Sodium chloride is a stable compound. Today we use a purification method including evaporation to create clean salt, pure salt. But back in those days, most salt in the ancient world came from salt marshes, and it was gathered and dried together with all of the impurities that came in that salt sludge. So they would just pick up a pile of salt sludge and set it out to dry, and whatever was in it was included in the salt. And so then what they would do is they would try to wash it out. They would try to wash the impurities out after it had dried. And what would happen is, as they tried to leach out those impurities, it would dilute the salt if they weren't careful, and it would become useless. It would dilute the salt. It would actually dissolve the salt, and it would become useless. Now, that diluted salt was like a fine grit when it was dried, but they didn't waste it. What they would do is they'd take that fine grit and they'd mix it with the soil, and they would put it on the roofs. Now, you've seen roofs of those Bible times. They were actual living spaces. They would go upstairs onto the roof because it was cooler up there, and they had actual open-air living spaces up there. And they would cover the floor of the roof with this mixture of this soil and this diluted salt, this salt grit. And as they covered it and it dried, it became like concrete. And so they would use that on the roofs of their houses, but also on the walkways around their houses. And so that's what Jesus is talking about. If you're not salty, if you lose your value, if you lose your worth as salt, then all you do is you end up getting used to as concrete. And then you are trampled under people's feet. So he's saying you're going to be used as salt. But how you're going to be used is up to you. It's your choice. You're going to be used in the world to make a difference in the world, or you're going to become part of the world, part of the concrete, part of the roof, part of the walkway. So get this. What Jesus was saying is that you don't have to be perfect. Listen to this. You don't have to be perfect to make a difference in the world. We all have flaws. We all have imperfections. We all have, if you will, impurities. But God can use us anyway. He can use us anyway. He knows what our flaws and our imperfections are, and if we get caught up in life trying to get rid of our flaws and imperfections, if we're so focused on being pure before God, it's just like, I can't do this, I can't do that, I got to stop doing this, I can't do this, yada, yada, and we just go on, and it's all about being pure. It becomes legalistic is what happens. Then when we get so caught up trying to get rid of the flaws and imperfections in our life, and trying to leach out the impurities, waiting to be salty in a world that needs us so desperately, we become of little value. See what happens? When I'm so focused on me, Making sure that I'm right, and I got to be right. I can't go to church until I stop doing this, and I can't be used by God until I stop doing this. And God's saying, wait a minute, I know what's going on in your life. Let me be the one that cleans out the impurities. That's what we're told in the Bible. 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sins, He's faithful and just to forgive us and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Who does the cleansing? Not you. Not you. It says He will do it. He will cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Let God forgive you for your sin and let Him get on with your life. Quit trying to cleanse your own self. Let God take care of what He has to do in your life. You just be focused and obedient on Him. He'll take care of the impurities. He'll take care of the flaws. He'll do what He has to do. Our job is to be who we are and let God use us with our flaws and our imperfections in a world that is even more flawed and imperfect. And if we're not willing and wanting to be used to bring flavor and preservation to a dying world, then we are like that worthless salt that has lost its value, and we become part of the world. Just like that salt became part of the ground, became part of the rooftop. So the choice is yours. Are you going to be in the world, making a difference, being salt, bringing flavor, and deterring putrefaction? Or are you going to dilute your spiritual value and just become part of the world, like the diluted salt in the walkways of the world? Are you in the world or of the world? John 17:14, Jesus was praying, and His words are so poignant about this very thing. He's praying, this is His last prayer, and He's praying for the disciples. But He says in His prayer, you go read it. He says in His prayer, I not only pray for these, but for those who will come. Who is that? Every person sitting in your chair. Jesus was praying for you in that John 17, in that prayer, you go and read it. It says there, I'm praying for those who will come. That's us. And this is one of the things that He prayed for you. It's in John chapter 17, starting with verse 14. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Here's your calling, brothers and sisters. You are called to be in the world, but not of the world. You are called to be salt in the world, to bring flavor to a world that needs flavor, and to stop putrefaction in a world that's so morally putrid and spiritually putrid that it needs salvation. That's what you're supposed to be doing. That's what God says. You want to leave a mark on the world? Become salt.
On behalf of Dan Hurst and the Open Class, we want to thank you for watching. We hope it was a blessing.